Holding on Daf Chaf Daled on page 24, 24b. And we did the Mishnah about a person making their sukkah using trees as their sukkah walls. Actually, before this, there was a little piece that we didn't go over. We were talking about gittin, the laws of divorce, and the Gemara brought that regarding the case of using a animal to write a divorce on, and we had different sources from the Sukkim, the two ways of learning the verses. If you could include what a divorce document needs to be, does it have to be a something that's similar to parchment, and it would exclude something that's live, and it would exclude also food. The rabbis didn't learn that way. They said that they held that a animal could be used as a divorce document. You could write it on an animal, and that could be the divorce. And the Gemara got into the different ways to read the verses. Kosav law, is there the word sefer? Does it mean sefer, a book or parchment, or does it mean sipur? Does it mean just to mention what the transaction is about? It's about a sipur dvarim. It's about the divorce of that they're getting divorced, not about the actual physical parchment that it's on. So there's two ways of translating the word samach peiresh, sefer or sipur, and ultimately it ends up being a machloikis if you're allowed to write a divorce on a live animal. And I went back and forth with how to read the other psukim, the other words in the pasuk, and you can it needs to be written. You can't get divorced with money. And then we had because the Gemara had a thought that maybe you would be allowed to divorce with money, just like you marry with money. You give either a ring or something valuable to make the marriage effective. So maybe the divorce would be the same thing. And the conclusion is no, that it doesn't work that way. And then we mentioned about a divorce on a condition. That was a discussion here, because a person made the condition that the Gemara mentions is that they made a condition on the divorce. He made a condition on the divorce on the condition that the wife doesn't go to her father's house forever. So that type of condition, the problem with it was that there are still strings attached. So he's still married to her. He's not totally divorcing her. And according to the meaning of divorce, according to Jewish law, is that it's total separation. It has to separate completely the marriage. It has to totally dissolve the marriage. And if there are still strings attached, it wouldn't totally dissolve the marriage. However, it does work if a person made a limited time type of condition. She can't go to her father's house for 30 days or some other time, within a time frame that would they would be alive. It's a certain time frame that would be considered a divorce, and it would even be a valid divorce immediately, except for the fact that rabbinically she would have to wait till the time is up in order to get married. But biblically, it would be considered a proper divorce. The divorce would take effect immediately according to the biblical law. And then and that was the conclusion of that was the conclusion basically of the previous Gemara. And then we got into this discussion of the making a sukkah between the trees, and the trees are considered the walls of your sukkah. And we had a statement from Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. It seems like Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, as we saw yesterday, the day before, yesterday or the day before yesterday, about the previous Gemara, was also Rav Acha Bar Yaakov talking about what constitutes a mechitza. So he earlier we learned about his rulings about a mechitza is not a mechitza. It's not considered a partition, a wall, unless it's solid. Can't be based on air. If it's being held up by air, that's not a mechitza. And he said another point that a mechitza, or some say he said a different statement, that a mechitza that's not made by man or can't be made by man is also not a mechitza. It's not considered a wall. And now, in this Gemara on page 24b, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says a mechitza that can't handle a wind, ruach mitzuya, a regular wind, is not called a mechitza. And the understanding of the Gemara is that this statement means that it can't handle a wind, meaning that it will actually move back and forth, not that it's going to fall over. Because if he means that it can't handle a wind and it will fall over, if that's what Rav Acha Bar Yaakov would mean, then it would not really be a contradiction from our Mishnah. See, the Gemara asks a contradiction, this statement and the Mishnah. What's the contradiction? The contradiction is that the statement that Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says, that a wall that can't handle a regular wind is not called a wall. That statement, if that means that it will topple over, a wall that topples over from a regular wind, that's not called a wall. Well, that would not be a contradiction to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says you can't make, the Mishnah says that you can make a mechitza, you can make a wall from a tree, from branches in a tree. That's a good wall. Now, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says that a wall that's going to topple over in a regular wind is not a good wall. Is that a contradiction? That's fine. A tree doesn't topple over in a regular wind. And so therefore, this is a good, this fits very well with Rav Acha Bar Yaakov's statement. He says a wall that's going to topple over is not a good wall. And the Mishnah says that a tree is a good wall. No problem. That seems to fit very well. So therefore, the Gemara must, the fact that the Gemara sees this as a contradiction, it must be understanding Rav Acha Bar Yaakov's statement to mean that a wall that waves, that shifts, that's what's not considered a proper wall. And that is a contradiction from the Mishnah, because the Mishnah says you could even use a tree as a wall, which implies even the branches and so on, that could be considered like a wall. And the problem is branches do seem to wave back and sway back and forth. And that would be a contradiction to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, who says if it can't stand in a regular wind, it's not considered a wall. What he means is it has to stand still, or a tiny movement, but it can't sway back and forth. And the understanding of the commentaries is that if it waves more than 3 handbreadths, if it sways more than 3 handbreadths, that would be a problem. There is an understanding, and I'm not sure if wondering if they bring it, and I'm just going to ask Google the law of a canvas sukkah. Hold on 1 second. What's going on here? Oh. What's the law?
Rabbi, question.
A canvas sukkah, yeah. Yes.
When you're saying 3 handbreadths, are you saying a total, meaning 3 from the vertical in either direction, or are we talking about total 3, meaning 1.5 max and 1.5?
Yeah, max? I would think that it means if it goes a little more than 1.5 this way and a little more than 1.5 that way, that's altogether it moves 3, then it's not really a solid wall.
Okay.
Now, this is my understanding, and I'm just wondering if they bring it here. My understanding is that the Chazon Ish has a leniency here. And I'm going to pull up the internet in a minute. But let me tell you what my understanding is, that the understanding, the simple understanding of the Gemara is the way the Mishnah Berurah understands it, and the other commentaries, that if it sways 3 handbreadths, that it's not considered a solid wall. And that's how we're gonna, of course, the Gemara is gonna have to explain that he tied it down, because otherwise it wouldn't be considered a kosher wall. And that's how the Gemara explains this Mishnah. But otherwise, it's not kosher because it's swaying. There is a Chazon Ish explanation that the way he seems to understand this is branches. If you're using branches, the problem is that branches for your wall, they separate. And when they separate 3 handbreadths, then you can't even call that a wall, because it actually is broken apart. Your wall has broken apart. And he says that's the problem with using a branches that you would call it, that it's not a mechitza, is because there's no connection between the 2 halves of your wall. He says, but if it's a canvas sukkah, according to this, what he's saying is, if it would be a canvas which is always connected, it's just moving a little, that, he says, that's not a problem. It's still a wall. It's when it separates, and it's some of the time it's not going to be a wall. The Mishnah, the Mishnah and the Gemara, the way it's understood is that if it's not going to be a wall, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, what he's basically saying is, if it's going to break apart, then we're going to say that even when it's attached, it's not a wall. If it can't handle a ruach mitzuya, a regular wind, and it separates, then it's not a wall. But if it stays attached, so it sways back and forth, it's still considered a wall. And that's, I think, the Chazon Ish's understanding. According to that, there's a little leniency, and it's what's nice is, even if we don't want to follow that law, that halach, that opinion, but it's nice to always find the leniency, so that people who have been using the canvas sukkahs for generations, we should be able to say that they've done the mitzvah properly. So even though maybe we wouldn't, we would like to be machmir and do it right, do it according to all opinions, or do it according to the commonly accepted opinions, but there does seem to be a lenient view here that qualifies what this that explains this in a slightly different than the simple understanding. And let me just pull up here. I just pulled up the Star K has an article here. I'm just pulling it up. I was invited to eat in a sukkah. Eat out. The sukkah has canvas walls which shake in the wind. Is this a problem? Oh. So what do they have? The Mishnah states a person can use the trunks of trees as a sukkah wall. The Mishnah is referring to a scenario where the tree trunks were very close to one another. Okay, I'm just going to skip a little. The Gemara states that this is true only if they do not sway. The tree trunks are, okay. The Shulchan Aruch codifies this halacha and adds that if the tree trunks are supple, one can tie them to each other in such a manner that they will no longer sway in the wind. However, he states that this is not ideal to do so, as it is possible that the ties will loosen on Yom Tov, rendering the sukkah invalid. Okay, how rigid do the sukkah walls need to be? The Chazon Ish suggests that a wall formed from tree trunks is invalid only if the trunks will sway more than 3 tefachim away from each other. The top of the wall will sway more than 3 tefachim away from the schach. There is a general principle in halacha called lavud, which means that any gap, 3 tefachim. Therefore, if the top of the wall is within 3 tefachim, we would consider those three as filled by schach. And however, if the top of the wall sways more, it would not consider okay. According to Chazon Ish, 3 tefachim is okay. Now, there is another principle known as good asik, which means that if the wall of a sukkah is halachically kosher, we would consider the wall to extend vertically. Now, that would mean if the wall of the sukkah is 10 tefachim high, which is the minimum height, we consider the wall to extend upward toward the sky. So if the sukkah is 10 tefachim high, and the vertical distance between we don't care about if there's extra, if the schach is much higher. Okay. So if the height of 10 tefachim, the trunk is rigid, then there's no problem of it swaying. So in other words, if part of the canvas on the bottom is more tight, so even though the top of it sways, that's not a problem. That would be now. Furthermore, it would seem that according to Chazon Ish, if a canvas wall was tied at the top and the bottom, so the top was always vertically within 3 tefachim of the ground, and the bottom was always vertically within 3 tefachim of the ground. The top was always horizontally within 3 tefachim of the schach. The wall would be kosher even if the middle canvas moved in the wind. See, this is what it seems to me that he holds, right? Now, however, the Igros Moshe states that no part of the canvas should sway more than 3 tefachim to each side in a regular wind, including the middle of the canvas. So there seems to be a machlokes here, and the Chazon Ish does seem to have a lenient view. They bring the Igros Moshe, who gives the more strict view, which seems to be the understanding in general. But they bring the Chazon Ish that he had this leniency, and now I see that they mention it here. The canvas sukkahs that are commonly used nowadays are tied at the top and on the bottom, do not sway more than 3 tefachim in the wind. Therefore, such a sukkah. Oh, so they're claiming that they don't sway more than 3 tefachim in the wind, which I don't know if that is correct. Maybe the newer ones.
The wording sounded like it was 3 in each direction, though. It didn't sound like 1.5 that you were splitting the 3. The wording.
Let me look at that again. No part of the canvas should sway more than 3 tefachim to each side in a regular wind. Oh,
that's a lot. That's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That's 3 on each side is a lot. So you could easily tie the canvas that the wind's not gonna.
Mm-hmm. I guess there's 2 ways to look at it. One way to look at it is the fact that it's limited to have 3 hand breadths. If it can sway more than 3 hand breadths, it's not a wall. But I guess the other way to look at it is, no, this is a wall here. If it sways more than 3 in that direction or more than 3 in that direction, that means that it has left the area where it's supposed to be significantly. And I guess they're looking at it that way. And I guess that's correct. I guess, Ezra, my answer to you was wrong. I guess it is 3 in each direction, and which does make it give you a little more leeway, I guess, to which approximately is 9 inches according to the Ram Chaim Noah. Okay, so in any event, yeah. So thank you for correcting me over there. That's I guess that's the way it's understood.
I just think it was a clarification.
Yeah.
Clarification.
No.
I don't want to. As for Shalom, I should have.
No, I think you're right. It seems to me that that's correct, and I guess you have to look at it differently. That's the way it's seen. That this is the wall. If it moves more than 3 in any direction, so then that would make it that it has sort of left the it's removed from being the original wall that it was. Okay, so in any event, the canvas sukkahs that are commonly used nowadays are tied on the top and the bottom, do not sway more than 3 tefachim in the wind. Therefore, such a sukkah would be kosher. However, as mentioned above, Shulchan Aruch states that it is not ideal to use such a sukkah, that the ties might become loose. Because Moshe says that such a sukkah should ideally be used only if the canvas would not sway more than 3 tefachim without the ties. It seems that the Igros Moshe would accept l'chatchila canvas wall if the canvas had been sewn around the metal frame in such a way that no part of the canvas sways more than 3 tefachim from the frame in a normal wind. Moedim Zmanim suggests that nowadays, where the canvas sukkahs are very well attached, the concern of the Shulchan Aruch no longer applies. However, it includes that it's advisable not to rely on this. He also questions the ruling of the Chazon Ish that the wall is kosher if it sways less than 3 tefachim from the schach. He questions that. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach also, in Rav Ovadia Yosef, also paskin that the wall should not sway at all. The wall should not sway at all. Mishnah Halachos, who's a Reb Menashe Klein, points out that it is commonly accepted custom to use canvas sukkahs. He suggests that the concern of Shulchan Aruch the ties will loosen is limited to a scenario where the tree trunks are tied only to each other with no further structure supporting the wall. If a person constructs a square frame, securely ties the canvas to it, the resulting wall is kosher lechatchila. And he quotes the Goyin of Chabin as advising a person with a canvas sukkah wall to do the following: tie a taut string from one edge of the canvas to the other, parallel to the ground, and within 3 tfachim of the ground. Tie a second string, taut string, likewise above, within 3 tfachim of the first string, and then you just basically that you'll have a loved, you'll create a tight wall. As the strings are taut, do not move in the wind. The Shulchan Aruch's concern would not apply. According to Rav Heinemann, l'chatchila, one should follow the psak of the Igros Moshe that no part of the canvas should sway more than 3 tfachim. Here he doesn't use that. It's interesting. In the beginning, he mentioned 3 tfachim from where it is. Should not sway more than 3 tfachim. For the Yevid, one may use a sukkah if the canvas wall is tied at the top and the bottom in accordance with the ruling of the Chazon Ish. So halachic queries regarding all topics may be presented to the Institute of Halacha at Star K. Okay, so that's the Star K's conclusion, which is interesting. He does bring that there are shitas that it really should not sway at all, and it seems like it's based on this sugya, in this Gemara.
From what I've heard from our rabbi here, the Sfaradim try to be more machmir on this with the walls because of the ruling of Avadia. Our walls are not we have a real. It's almost like those shower walls they used to have. You know, the like the sliding doors on the shower. But it's a sukkah wall, so that's what we always had. We bought it a long time ago, and Baruch Hashem, it lasted all these years.
Okay, so anyway, this is the Star K's conclusion, and Canvas Sukkah. I'll just bring one more little article here. Person purchased it. Okay, I purchased a canvas sukkah. Someone was telling me that this can be problematic as it blows in the wind. I've tried to make it as tight as possible, but it still does sway. I heard there's a solution of tying string around using the concept of loved. How much string would one need? Okay, what you were told is correct. If the walls of the canvas will move in the wind, then they are not considered kosher walls for the sukkah. There are indeed some canvas sukkahs that have metal poles spaced less than 3 tfachim apart from each other for this specific purpose. If the sukkah you does not have these metal poles, you can use a solution of tying. Okay, but he doesn't go into he doesn't go into it. That's not a good source. Just saying if there's any other. Oh, the OU has something here. Okay, so just to read one more paragraph from the OU. Is a canvas sukkah kosher if the walls move in the wind? The walls of a canvas sukkah, unless they are tied down very tightly, will move with the wind. There are different opinions as to what type of movement invalidates a sukkah. To satisfy all opinions, the wall should not move in the wind at all. And the source he brings is Yechave Das. That's Rav Avadia Yosef. Oh, I'm sorry, Mordechai, do you have a question?
Yeah, the sukkahs that we've purchased recently, they advertise that they're Star K approved.
That doesn't, yeah, okay. So the Star K seems to follow that it shouldn't be more than 3 tfachim. That it shouldn't move more than 3 tfachim. But it seems like the Rav Avadia Yosef is more machmir, would hold of the it shouldn't move at all. Anyway, this standard is difficult to achieve with the canvas sukkah. In the past few years, some sukkah merchants have addressed this concern by including stretchable straps with the canvas walls. The straps wrap around the sukkah. The first strap should be here. Okay, then they each have all the rules of the straps. They don't like to get into the details, the nitty-gritty details of the. They're not discussing the actual details of how tight it has to be according to different opinions. They're not sharing that. Okay. In any event, so we saw that there seems to be different opinions, and we do have what I think is the Chazon Ish's opinion that if it's a solid wall, it seems to be what to rely on, and that's what it seems like the Star K was saying, that since it's a solid wall, it's not separating, so there might be some leniency, which is nice to find the leniency that at least those people who used it have not been transgressing the law of not eating in a kosher sukkah. Okay, so in getting back to our Gemara, so we have this contradiction between the Mishnah of Rav Acha bar Yaakov, and the answer that the Gemara gives is that he tied it that it's that number one, it's a strong trunk, and it's old, it's thick, it's strong, it's sturdy, and it's not a young tree that's swaying. And then the Gemara says, what about the branches? No, you tied them together with chutza v'dafna, these type of different types of branches. So the Gemara says, so what is Rav Acha? What is the Mishnah? Why does the Mishnah have to tell us this law? Why would the Mishnah have to tell us this law that you use them as a wall if they're solid? If the Mishnah was telling you that you're using branches as a wall, so I would think that the Mishnah is telling me that even though they move, it's a kosher wall. But if the Mishnah is not talking about a case where the branches move, but the Mishnah is instead talking about a case where the branches are tied down, so then of course you could use them as a wall. So the Gemara's answer is no, we're afraid if you use a branch, a tree as a wall, you might end up hanging something on it on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So that was the insight of the Mishnah, the innovation of the Mishnah, the purpose. The Mishnah is trying to teach you that we're not afraid that you're going to use the wall as on Shabbos and Yom Tov as a hanging, some type of thing to have as a closet. And so that's the case of the Mishnah is that the wall that you're using is really solid. It's not moving in the wind. You've tied it, and then the Gemara says, and I think this is where we're up to. Okay, we're up to Tashema. So we're going to start here on page 24b. 24b, we're about 8 lines from the bottom of the page. Tashema. The Gemara here, 24b, 8 lines from the bottom. Tashema. Come and hear. Come and hear. Gemara normally uses that type of term when it's trying to bring a proof or a question to a certain opinion that was quoted. The opinion that was quoted was Rav Acha bar Yaakov. He said that a mechitza that can't handle a regular wind, the ruach mitzuya, that is not called a mechitza, a wall. A wall that sways is not a wall. Now that the Gemara is trying to find either proofs or questions on that. So the first was from our Mishnah, and we thought it was a contradiction to Rav Acha bar Yaakov's statement, and we concluded that it's not a contradiction, that our Mishnah is talking about that he tied it down. Now comes another proof against another question on Rav Acha bar Yaakov, and the Gemara says, Tashema, come and hear, Hayasham Elon Oygeder, Oy Mechitzas Konim. That if he had there around the well, and this takes us back to an old, to a Gemara that we had many pages before, page 7, where we talked about. Oh, we actually had it. We had it not that long ago as well. We had it also on page like 23. We brought it down as well. But basically, we've been learning about the case of had this case before where you have a well that you're making where you're making some type of a wall around the well, because the well is considered a reshus hayachid, a private domain, and you want to take water out of the well to feed your animals, to give to drink, to give your animals to drink. And this was especially applicable in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, when they would be oila regel, they would they would travel and to the Beis Hamikdash, and what would they do for Shabbos? They would sleep on the way. They would sleep on the basically in no man's land, and they would they didn't have a place for their animals to get water, so they would go to the well. But the well is a reshus hayachid. If they pulled the water out of the reshus hayachid and to give their animals to drink, it would end up being that they carried from a reshus hayachid outside to a reshus harabim, to a public domain. So what did the rabbis say? If they're going to have to build a wall around, it's going to be too much of a headache. So they're allowed to make 4 diyumdin. A diyumid means diyu. Diyu is like the word duo. It's two amudim. So the combination of two poles, two boards, two boards would be diyumid. Diyai amudim. Diyumid. So they made these diyumids, which are basically 4 corners, the 4 corners. In each of those 4 corners, they sort of like, there's a well, and you have the 4 corners around the well. And each of those 4 corners had 2 walls to it, one going in one direction and one going perpendicular the other direction. So sort of like 4 L-shaped corners. And each corner was like an L shape, and each one was an amma wide. And those would be considered like a reshus hayachid. It would basically allow the people to draw the water from the well. And how could they take it out of the well? They're bringing from a private domain to a public domain. The answer is that this is also a private domain because they have a wall around it. A wall around it? What do you mean? You only have 4 corners. You don't have a wall? No. Really, it's not considered a reshus. When you have these 4 walls, biblically, it would be considered fine to carry from a reshus hayachid to it, and therefore the rabbis didn't. They had no problem because it's a time of great need and so on. People that they needed water for their animals. So basically, it was considered permissible, and the rabbis didn't enforce a more strict law. They said that would be good enough for a well. Now, so the thing is, the case that we're talking about here is, so you have this well, Hayasham Elon. You had you had the well, and you have a tree that is thick. Not only is it thick, it's round, so it's the same thickness as one direction as the other direction, basically. So it's the size of a amma. From the width, and the size of an amma, the length. And so this should be considered like a diyumid, like 2 boards. This, in other words, if you would carve it out, you could get 2 boards out of it. One amma this way and one amma that way. So it's round, so it has in it these 2 ammas, two cubits. Oy geder. Or if you have a stone fence, that's a square. It's a thick square of a stone fence that could also be considered an amma this way and an amma that way. Or if you have reeds that are planted in the ground in an L-shaped format. So all of these cases would be considered like you have a board that's a cubit from north to south, and it's a board that's a cubit from east to west, and that would be considered one corner. Then you'd have to deal with the other corners, but at least this would be considered kosher for this corner. In other words, if you had all 4 corners like this, it would also be fine. The case in the case that our brisa is mentioning is that you have one of the corners. You don't feel like building something. There's something there already. You have a wall. You have something there. Can you consider that the diyumid, the corner for a well? And the answer is yes, that's considered kosher. So it's nidoy mishum diyumid. Now the Gemara asks that if this could be considered a wall for Shabbos to allow you to carry in that area, and if so, how does it work with the kanim, the reeds, when you have this mechitza, this wall that you're considering, this L-shaped wall that you're considering a wall because you put a number of reeds next to each other, and they're 10 tefachim high, they're 10 handbreadths high, and that's considered a wall. The question is, aren't they gonna sway in the wind? And Rav Acha Bar Yaakov told us that if it sways in the wind, it's not called a mechitza. So that doesn't seem to fit with this brisa. We've got a brisa here that says that if you have a tree or a geder, stone fence, or mechitzas hakonim, or you have these reeds, it's not going to be, it's not a problem. They're usable for diyumid, nidoin mishum diyumid. So the question would be that how could that be with the reeds? And the truth is, the question would also be with the elan, the tree. Both of these things seemingly would sway in the wind. So what's the answer? There as well is a case, both the reeds and the tree, is that you tied it with hutza v'dafna, with these type of branches that would tie it down in a way that it is not going to, they're not going to sway with the wind. And if they're not going to sway with the wind, it will be considered proper corners for your well, that your well will be considered to have to be a kosher to carry. Okay, so that's the law of Eruv.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have a picture.
Okay. Yeah. If you. Yeah. I think that's the next Gemara, unless you mean to show us a picture.
Yeah, it says the Elon Mesach al Haaretz. Did you do that one?
No.
Oh,
This is the one before. Do you have a picture on the previous Gemara? Is there another picture there?
no.
Oh.
No, this is the only one.
You're ahead of us.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem, David. You're pushing me to go a little faster, so that's good. Okay, let's go back to the Gemara. So let's go to the next piece. So Tashma, come in here. We're going to see from another source if there's a question on Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. Because Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, again, he said this law about a mechitza, a wall that sways in the wind. Is that going to be considered a kosher wall? He said it's not. It sways in a regular wind. It's not going to be a kosher wall. So the Gemara says, let's bring a proof. Tashma, come in here. The following proof. And this is regarding, it's also regarding carrying, but not regarding a well. Elon hamesach al haaretz. If you have a tree that is mesach, it's like schach. It's covering over. It's the branches are all it's like shade on the earth. So it's covering over the earth. It's spread out over the earth. If the branches are not higher than 3 handbreadths from the ground, metaltalin tachto, you can carry under it on Shabbos. We are going to consider this tree to be like a private domain. What does that mean? That if you have a tree and it's around, it has round, let's say the branches are all around it, go all around, and they go very low. It has long branches that go all the way down. It might be a high tree, but the high tree that has long branches that go very low, close to the ground, within 3 handbreadths to the ground. And we know that within 3 handbreadths to the ground, there's no problem of considering it attached to the ground because it has the law called lovin. Lovin means that anything within 3 handbreadths is considered attached. And so here you have a tree with these long branches, and it's ultimately going to be considered like it's a private domain. So if you have such a thing, so you would be allowed to carry under it because we're considering it, it's like you're inside a fence. You're inside, you're all covered over. So the Gemara says, why are you allowed to? This doesn't seem to fit with Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Because if you think about it, branches, if they're generally when the branches are hanging down, it means they're not too strong, and they're probably going to be swaying with the winds. All these branches are going to be going back and forth. And so how could they be considered a mechitza, a wall that's going to you're going to call this a private domain that you're going to be able to carry? So the Gemara says that, you know what? We're talking about Hasam Nami. They're also the Avidle, Behutza Vedafna, that you made these branches tight with Hutza and Dafna, with the palm branches and the laurel branches. So ultimately, you have tied it down, and it's not going to sway with the wind, and it's fine. This is a perfect. That's a perfect Rishus Hayachid, private domain. So the Gemara says, if so, that you tied it down, nitaltel bekule, we should be allowed to carry in the entire area under this tree. If this is called a proper, if it's really called a proper mechitza and you tied it down, so it should be considered that this is your private dwelling place. If that's so, in other words, that you tied it down, then this is really called a residential dwelling. So Alama, Amar Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yeshua. Why did Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yeshua say, Ein metaltalin boy, you're not allowed to carry in it, Ela Beisasayim, only if it's up to the size of 2 sa'ah, only if it's up to the size of 5,000 square cubits. If it's anything less than that, then you can carry it. But if it's that size or more, then it's not considered a residential area. Now the Gemara is asking that law, that only residential areas you could carry in, if it has a fence, in residential you could carry as far as big as it is. If you have a house that's the size of a hotel, you're allowed to carry it because it's residential. If your house is so big, it doesn't matter, it's residential. But if you have a property and it's not a property used for dwelling, it's not residential, so there is a limit to how large it could be rabbinically, at least to be able to carry. And the rabbis limited it to 5,000 square feet, which is the size of the courtyard of the Mishkan. It's 50 by 100 cubits, and 50 by 100 cubits was basically the equals 5,000 square. That's Beisosai. So the question the Gemara has here is that you have this property has this big tree, and this big tree seems to be we're going to use it for the wall, at least part of the tree, or we're going to use the whole tree. You're using the branches of this tree for a wall. Now, the Gemara, when it talks about this case in Eruvin, it adds a qualification. Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yoshua says, it only works if it's less than 5,000 square feet, less than base sa'im, 2 sa'as. If it's 2 sa'as or more, this doesn't work. Now, the Gemara is asking, we understand that rule. That rule means that if it's not meant for residential, then you have a limit. The Gemara is asking, but what do you mean? If you tie down the branches, that should make it that it's considered residential. So if you didn't tie down the branches, everything flows very well. You didn't tie down the branches, it's considered a machitza, and we're not going to call this residential. You didn't tie down the branches, but it's considered, it has a wall and it's kosher. But if you're going to tell me that you tied down the branches, then it creates a whole new problem. If you want to answer that, so in other words, it works very good without Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, everything goes smooth. Because without Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, without his law that everything has to be tied down, it has to be solid walls, without that, I would say this statement from Eruvin fits very well. Why? Because this law that it says in Eruvin, this Mishnah in Eruvin, this law that it says there, you could say it's talking about a case where you did not tie down the walls, and it's considered a reshus hayachid. They're considered walls, but it's not oimed ladira. It's not residential, and since it's not residential, I would say that the people are allowed to carry in it up to, as long as it's not as big as Beis Osayim. But if it's as big as Beis Osayim, if it's 5,000 cubits, then you can't carry in it because it's not a residential area, and so it loses its ability to be considered a private domain. It's not really a private domain. However, if we're going to learn that you actually tie down the branches, if you tie down the branches, that makes it pretty much private. You made it private, and so who lives in this type of thing? It's generally lived in to watch. It's used to watch the field. The person who's the shomer, the watchman, sleeps in it, dwells there. And you tied it down. You built it. You made it with your. You must have. If you tied it down, you did it with that intention. Why are you tying it down? He's going to have it as his private area to dwell. So he should be allowed to carry, even if it's very large. That's the Gemara's question.
Rabbi, question.
Yeah.
You said Beit time, which is the equivalent of 50 cubits by 100 cubits.
Right.
Okay, so that's 5,000 square cubits. Now,
Yeah.
1 square cubit is anywhere from 2.25 square feet to 4 square feet, which means that we're talking about anywhere from 11,250
1 second.
feet
An amma is either 1.5
or 2. So I'm saying it's either
square amma would be again 1.5
by 1.5, which is 2.25.
Okay.
So we're talking about either 11,250 square feet or anywhere up to 20,000 square feet. It's not, it's not 5,000 square, it's not 5,000 square feet. It's actually anywhere.
5,000 amas, 5,000 square amas. That's what I meant to say. 5,000 square amas.
Okay, so 1 amma is the equivalent of 1.5 foot or 2 feet, depending on how you want to do it.
Okay.
So that gives you over 11,000 square feet in if you're taking the smaller one, or 20,000 square feet if you're taking the larger one.
Okay.
Which is a big area.
Okay, thank you for calculating, because I would have thought that 5,000 square feet, the most extreme opinion would be 10,000 square feet would be but that's not true. Huh? There's another way to calculate it. Okay. So, okay.
mean,
Well, I have to do my calculation.
Because when you square it, the whole math changes when you do when you
Everything
square it.
doubled. Right. Right. Oh, of course, because it's going both ways. Right. So how much is it if it's two? Would that be 20,000?
20,000 square feet.
20,000. So you okay, fine, gotcha. So it'd be 20,000 square feet. Okay.
That's a big area.
Right. Right. Okay. Fine. Very good. So so it comes out that so the Gemara is asking this question that it seems like it's a residential. So the Gemara's answer is no, that it's not considered residential. Why? Because this guy who's the watchman who's living in it, he's not really living there as a residential resident. He's living there to do work and to watch the fields outside. Mishum dahavi dira shetashmisha la'avir. His dwelling is not really a dwelling for him to dwell in. It's made for the fields that are outside of his area where he's in. And if so, it's it's meant for the watchmen to dwell there, but not to dwell there as a real dwelling. Really, because they need to be near the fields, and the fields are outside of it. The kol dira shetashmisheha la'avir, in all dwellings that their purpose is for what's outside of it. Ein mataltlin boy elososayim. You're limited to have this 5,000 square amos, square cubits. You're limited to that, and it's not called a dira dwelling to allow you to have such a large to allow you to have a big, very large area. No, that won't work. Only if it's a smaller area, then you're allowed to carry in it. If it's a larger area, it is limited, and there's a problem, because it's not, you can't call it a dira dwelling, and you would be limited to these 5,000 cubit threshold. So that's the answer that the Gemara gives, that even though you tie down the walls and it sounds like you're making it into a dwelling, but since your whole dwelling is only for outside of that area, it's only the watchmen that are there, so to speak, temporarily. So therefore, it's not considered a real residential area, and you would be limited to that area. Okay. Now comes the next Gemara. The next Gemara is about the din of counting 2,000 cubits in order to not to go outside of the tchum. You're not allowed to travel outside of the 2,000 cubits limitation. You can't go outside of that on Shabbos. And the Mishnah, the Gemara here brings Tashma, come and hear a proof, and this is going to be against Rav Acha. It's going to be a proof against Rav Acha, or a question on Rav Acha Bar Yaakov's statement about a wall that's not solid, is not considered a wall. Tashma, come and hear this proof. It's from a brisa. It says, Shavas betel. If a person rested on a mound, like a hill, Shehu Gavoya Asara, which is it is high 10 handbreadths. Vehu may arba ames ad beisosai, and its height, it is 10 handbreadths high, so it's a so to speak, separated from the other area, from the other land, and we can consider it almost like it has walls because it's high up, 10 handbreadths, and we can consider the elevation of it, the walls that are lifting it up, that as if those walls continue extending, and it's as if it's separated, as if it has walls around it. And so this hill is also the size of 4 cubits until up to Beis Osayim, the same measure, 5,000 cubits. It's between 4 amos by 4 amos up to the size of 2 sa'as, which is, again, between these 4 square cubits up to 5,000 square cubits. V'chein, similarly, beneka, if there was a neka, like a valley or a hole, shehu amay kasara, which is deep 10 handbreadths. So this is, the first case was it's high 10 handbreadths. This case is it's low 10 handbreadths. V'hu meyar ba'amis ad Beis Osayim, similar measurement of area, that it's between 4 square cubits to 5,000 square cubits. V'chein kama katsura, and similarly, if you have harvested grain, vishiboilois makifais isa, and there are standing grain that is surrounding it, mahalech eskula, around the entire area. Oh, I'm sorry. Makivas isa, period. Makivas isa. I read that wrong. Makivas, that you have the shiboilas that are makifit, that are surrounding it. So the din is, the halacha is, what happens in this case? You want to walk 2,000 amos. Now, of course, you would like to walk as much as you can. You want to be able to travel in every direction that's possible as much as you can. What is do you have to start your measurement of your limitation of 2,000 cubits? Where does that limitation start from? So in a residential area, it generally starts from the end of your city. So if you were living in a certain city and you wanted to walk outside of the city, you get 2,000 amos outside of your city or outside of your house. What happens if you're traveling? You're not in a city. So then you're limited to 2,000 amos outside of your area. What's your area? The area that you're in is 4. You take up 4 cubits. A person his area is considered 4 square cubits. That's what you're limited to. You want to walk outside, you get 4 cubits plus 2,000 cubits. And that's as far as you can go, either this direction or that, in any direction. You get to walk up to 2,000 cubits. The problem is here you're in it's not a problem. The good thing is here you're in like an area that maybe you could consider to be your private area. That your private area is not just 4 cubits. Maybe your private area is 3,000 cubits because you're on a hill, and because you're on this hill, you could walk the entire hill maybe, and then another 2,000 cubits. We're going to stop here because my time is up, but that is the case, and to be continued, Metz Hashem, tomorrow. Sei gesund, and also remember,
safe travels. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi.
We'll see you this afternoon,
Have a
right?
good trip.
Metz Hashem, yeah, because Rabbi Citron's going to be tomorrow.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Metz Hashem. Okay. Sei gesund.